which was very cool. And now, excuse me, we should be able, there we go. I'm not sure what was in the introduction. I'm sorry, the presenter was muted. So if I repeat anything, my apologies. But my wife and I retired and moved to South Carolina from Southern California a little over 4 years ago. And then in the time that I lived in Southern California, which was my whole life until we moved out here, I was not a birder. I mean, I was a camper and a hiker, and I enjoy birds, but no more or less than any of the other animals. And I certainly didn't keep lists or anything along those lines. And which is really my bad. It's unfortunate because my wife and I have been lucky enough to have traveled to all 50 states and I don't know, maybe 35 countries. And obviously we've seen or could have seen an unbelievable number of birds over that time. And I'm sure we did see many of the birds, but I wasn't keeping track and I wasn't paying as close of attention as I do now. So that is my loss, but I'll try to make up for it. I use this picture of bald eagles because the first day that we moved into our house, we had bought the house online without ever having been here. We live on Lake Greenwood in South Carolina. And the first day we were here with our realtor and he's showing us around and a bald eagle flew across the lake and onto the property and landed onto a tree right by the lake, right there at the shore. And I thought that was a pretty cool deal that happened. I am a writer. I have published 50 some odd books in the last 7 years since I started writing, and I absolutely love it. Most of them are Westerns, but there's also children's books and business books and novels and nonfiction books, a variety of things. This book is my first book venturing into birding. And I was specifically looking for something I could write about because it's how I express myself a lot. But I am not an ornithologist or a scientist, nor am I even an expert birder. Having only been doing it 4 years, I would definitely consider myself still a novice, but I do love it. And we had moved here right when COVID started. I had seen the movie The Big Year when it first came out. To me, it wasn't about birding. It was about these actors. I like all three of them. So I enjoyed the movie. But then when we moved out here, we watched the movie again after I had expressed an interest in birding. And that came from my son. We have a screen porch out back, and we were sitting out there having a cigar and just talking, and as we do pretty frequently. So there were a number of birds flying by, and I just casually mentioned, you know what, I've got to learn what these birds are and start to figure out what we've got here in the backyard. And a couple of days later, a Sibley's guide showed up. My son had done a little bit of research and had ordered me a Sibley's guide, and from there, I've been an enthusiastic birder all the way around. When I watched the movie this second time, the idea of a big year appealed to me. But like most of us, I have limits on time and expertise and budget. But as I grew to love raptors, which I love, they're absolutely my favorite birds. And I discovered that there were 53 of them that call the United States home, call the lower 48 home. Forgive me. I thought, well, that turned out that could be a manageable thing. So I'm going to attack that and see if I could track down all 53 in 12 months. It actually took me 17 months, which was my bad. I did not realize how many of the birds would be challenging to find and to be found in the winter only. And so I kind of messed up that first winter and had to cycle back around to a second one. But I didn't mind extending the adventure. So that was kind of cool. As I was studying raptors, I discovered there are 53 of them in the lower 48 states. And this is the breakdown. 3 vultures, the turkey and the black and the condor, 19 owls and 31 diurnals. There are no other endemic raptors up in Alaska, but in Hawaii there are. There's the cleverly named Hawaiian hawk, which is its own species. And they also have barn owls, and then the third raptor they have on the islands are the short-eared owls, which in Hawaii are considered a subspecies of our mainland short-eared owls. But I believe it'll be about 2 or 3 years, and those are going to be split out into their own species. They lead a different life than the ones do here on the mainland. There are studies being done now, research, for the express purpose of having them split out. So there will be another unique one. But here on the mainland, we've got this breakdown. I found it fascinating when I was doing the research that there is no generally accepted definition of what a raptor is. There are a number of people and organizations that have presented definitions, but they have not been universally accepted. And that argument, discussion, whatever you might want to call it, continues now. And it is interesting to follow that. I related to, if any of you remember reading about it or lived through it, Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart in 1964 was famously asked to define pornography. He said that he couldn't do it, but he knew it when he saw it. And that seems to be the same thing with raptors. Are vultures raptors? They're generally grouped with raptors, but there's a lot of discussion about that. Frankly, if I was to redo the book, I wouldn't include them. I've come to believe that they shouldn't be classified with the raptors, but that's just my personal belief. Harlan's hawks, if you're familiar with them, are a subspecies of the red-tailed hawks, and they are probably going to be split out as well in the next couple of years. They have already been split and lumped 3 or 4 times in the last 50 years, depending who sits on the various ornithological committees. Currently, they are a subspecies, but they are trending toward becoming their own species again. So if you find yourself up in Montana, North Dakota, Wyoming, and you see some red-tailed hawks, take an extra look, see if they're Harlan's hawks, and make sure you note that in eBird, and you may wake up one day with an extra tick on your list. And there are a number of the raptors that we don't get very often. The hook-billed kite is really more of an occasional visitor from Mexico than it is a U.S. resident. And then we've got some owls up north, the northern hawk owl, the snowy, and the great gray owls. Really, those are Canadian birds, but we're Americans, so we claim everything. And we do get to see those. If you're looking for a hook-billed, Benson State Park in southeastern Texas is the best place to find them. And they have a hawk watch stand up there. And you can go and on their hawk watch stand, and you're looking across the Rio Grande into Mexico. And so you can actually, if you're there, say at 10 or 11 o'clock, when the thermals fire up, you can watch the vultures lift off the ground. I've seen them in groups of over 1,000 that'll lift off and start their soaring. And they'll start in Mexico, and you can see them, and they'll work their way over to the United States. And that is a pretty cool deal. So it's something to keep track of. This is the distribution of raptors. This was my canvas. I worked with the lower 48. All of the stats that I'm going to give you, all the numbers that I'm going to share with you, are based on eBird. So if you're an eBird user, you can find those. And if you're not, at least you'll know where I got my research. I'm not saying that it's perfect, but it's as good as any, and it's pretty universal. So that's what I decided to do. 20 of the 53 raptors in the United States can be found in all 48 lower states. I thought that was kind of cool. I'm not sure I would have guessed that the number was that high, but that's what it is. 2 of the raptors have been found in 47 of the 48 states. The northern goshawk, or that's what it was when I started the project in 21, now it's the American goshawk, and the northern saw-whet owl have both not been spotted in Louisiana. They've been seen in the other 47, but not Louisiana. I don't know if they don't like parishes or don't like Cajun food, but it's interesting that they've been seen in the states all around, but not in Louisiana. So hopefully they will. Hopefully one of us will be the one to find them. The snowy owl has skipped only 2 states, Arizona and New Mexico. It's been spotted in the other 46. I'm sorry about that. I went too fast. And 5 of the raptors are normally found in 3 states or fewer: the Aplomado falcon, the ferruginous pygmy owl, the whiskered screech owl, the hook-billed kite, and the white-tailed kite. Interestingly enough, All 5 of those are predominantly found in Texas. They can be found in Arizona, New Mexico, and some other states surrounding Texas, but generally those are Texas birds. And that is a great place to go when you are looking for raptors. This is the distribution of me. A lot of people ask me where I went on the trip and what I did. Driving was my preferred mode of travel, but it wasn't always possible based on time. But I did do 7 cross-country trips. I did 13 round-trip flights, which wound up being about 50 legs of flights. I was on the road for 25 weeks because I did a lot of day trips and a lot of overnight trips to try to track down a bird. And it took me to 34 states, and I traveled a little over 100,000 miles. And all of this was unique for birding, and most of it I was by myself. These are the states that I drove to most frequently: Florida, Texas, Montana, and California. These are the states that I flew to. And interestingly enough, of those 50 or so legs of flight, I know a lot of people complain about the airlines and whatnot, but every single leg of a flight that I took over that 17 months took off on time, and every single leg, with the exception of one, landed on time. And the only one that didn't was a flight from Houston into Harlingen, Texas. I was going down to find that dang hook-billed kite, and got a flight out of Houston, I don't know, 10:30, 10:45 at night. And when we got close to Harlingen, the captain came on and said, "Hey, it's pretty foggy in Harlingen. We're not sure we're going to be able to land there. We've got 15 minutes worth of fuel left, so we're going to circle around, see if we can come in under the fog. And if not, we're going to turn around and go back to Houston." Now, I'm not a mathematician, nor am I a pilot. I guess this is a presentation about all the things I'm not. But those are 2 that I'm not. And I thought to myself, well, it took us 45 minutes to get here. If we only have 15 minutes worth of fuel, that seems like a negative to me. They must have figured out what they said, because a couple minutes later, the pilot came on and said, "Now, what I meant to say was we have 15 minutes worth of fuel to play with. We have plenty of fuel to get back to Houston," which is exactly what happened. We wound up having to go back to Houston and catch a flight out in the morning. But I did get the hook billed, so that turned out to be fantastic. These are the states that I covered. The ones in white are ones that I did not visit, at least in a birding capacity on the trip. And of all those miles that I drove, 100,000 miles that I drove on the trip, it was interesting. I never had a breakdown. Most of them I was by myself in the truck, and I never had a breakdown, never had a problem. Consider myself blessed. The only kind of quasi thing that didn't go proper was on me. I had driven up into Montana. I was in Kalispell. I was trying to find a snowy owl, and it had been seen on eBird for 3 or 4 days in a row at a tiny little private airport just outside of Kalispell. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go find that bird. So I got up there, and sure enough, the day I got there was the day it wasn't spotted. I got there on a Monday, and I looked on Monday and all day Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday, and I didn't find the bird. It was kind of a cool little area. It's the Flathead Lake Sky Ranch Airport. And I kept looking, and finally Friday morning, and I had to fly home Friday night. Friday morning, I thought, well, you know what? I know there's a place about an hour and a half from here that's great for raptors. And so I drove over there, and sure enough, in about 2 hours, right after sunrise, I was able to see 119 raptors driving through this one farm area. It's just spectacular for raptors. And then I wanted to get back to the airport, take one last look for that snowy before I had to fly out. Manning Road is the main road at the Flathead Lake Sky Ranch Airport. I typed Manning Road into the GPS, came up 3.5 hours away, no problem. I turned a book on tape and started driving and just casually following the directions. After about an hour and a half, I looked up, and I was in the middle of a traffic jam, and I saw a sign above me, and it said that I was crossing into the Canadian border, which was nowhere near where I needed to go. And as it turns out, my mistake, there is a Manning Road in Alberta, Canada, that was also 3.5 hours from where I was. And I had just gone ahead and accepted that on my GPS. And the Canadians were not happy to have me come up there without a passport. They kept me for a little over 3 hours, tore the car apart looking for drugs or guns or whatever they were looking for. and then gave me a little piece of paper, said, give this when you come back on the American side, and they'll just let you right in. That did not turn out to be the case. The Americans couldn't understand why I was in Canada without a passport. They kept me for 3 hours. Finally, I was freed back into our own country. I raced back to Manning Road at the little airport, and I saw a guy on the side of the road right when I drove in, and drove up behind him, and I said, any chance you're looking for the Snowy? And he pointed, and about 25, 30 feet away, there was this beautiful bird sitting on a tool shed in a guy's backyard who lived at the airport. And the bird stayed. It was close to dusk, so it stayed until it was dark. I was able to get some great pictures and share some time with the guy that put me on the bird. And it was a really neat deal. And that's one of the things that I've grown to love about birding, is it's not a zero-sum hobby or activity. There's no downside to somebody, in this case, sharing the snowy owl with me. He still gets to see the bird and enjoy it, maybe even enjoy it more because he's able to have a conversation with another enthusiast, but there is no downside. So except for people that are hyper competitive about their eBird list, it's a really cool thing how much birders enjoy helping other birders find different birds. So that I really enjoyed about this experience. So that was a pretty neat deal. Raptors by state. What I mean by this is, of the 53 raptors that I wrote about, I used a story for each of the raptors on where I had seen it. You know, as we said earlier in the presentation, there were a number of raptors that, you know, I mean, I saw them in multiple states, red-tailed hawks, especially osprey, vultures, certainly, you know, you see in state after state. But in each of those, I picked one state and one incident and one story that I chose to write about. And so I thought it'd be fun to kind of break down what states those were. 5 states had 1 or 2 birds that I wrote about: North Dakota, Pennsylvania, Wyoming, Minnesota, and New Jersey. 2 states had 4, Colorado, and those were all owls, and I'll talk about them a little later, but all small owls, and Florida. 2 states had 5 that I wrote about: California and Arizona. Montana had 8, the snowy, the short, and the long-eared owls, the rough-legged hawk, the Harlan's hawk. Although it's not one of the 53, I did write a chapter about it because I'm pretty confident that it will be. The American goshawk, formerly the northern goshawk. In the book, it's the northern goshawk. And the last 2 that I got, and I'll talk about those toward the end of the presentation, but the gyrfalcon and the northern hawk owl, those were numbers 52 and 53. My home state, South Carolina, I wrote about 9 different encounters with the raptors. And one state, Texas, I wrote about 11, and actually 12 if you count the bat falcon, because I wrote about a couple of rarities as well. And so Texas had the most by far. One of those was the ferruginous pygmy owl. Excuse me. And the best place to find that is the best place in the lower 48 is on King Ranch in Texas. If you're not familiar with King Ranch, it's a couple 100-year-old ranch. It was founded by a sea captain. It is a massive ranch. It's 825,000 acres. And for perspective's sake, the entire state of Rhode Island is 777,000 acres. So it's actually bigger than an entire state. I got on a van. There was a guide, Tom Langshield, great guide. There's tremendous birding out there on King Ranch. If you haven't been and you get a chance, you might want to take advantage of that. But we got in the van, and the other 2 people, it was a mother and a son. The son was about 20, and I never guessed a woman's age, so whatever age she was. But it was the 3 of us in the guide, and we were all there to see the ferruginous. And early on in the trip, we heard one, but it wasn't a great sound. It wasn't one that I was going to count. And then a little later on in the morning, we got a short look at one. Not a great look, enough to count, but not a comforting or exciting look. And then around 11 o'clock, we would stop. We were going to have lunch or breakfast or whatever it is. And they've got a picnic table out there in the middle of the ranch. And we pulled the van up and sat down, and I looked up, and maybe 40, 45 feet away, was this stunning bird, and it was sitting on this branch. And it actually sat there the entire time we ate. We were probably there 40 minutes, I would say, maybe 30 minutes. It stayed the whole time. It napped a little bit, it preened a little bit. You know, it was just, it didn't mind us at all. I got this picture and hundreds of other ones, and really, really enjoyed the experience. The young man who was there, his name is Frank Fabro, and he's going to come up again here real quick. But before we leave King Ranch, one of the other birds that I saw that day that I wrote about was the white-tailed hawk. For those of you that don't know, its nickname is the firehawk. And the reason for that is over the years when plains fires have started out in Texas, and of course there used to be far more than there are now, but when those fires would start, that would send the insects into the sky. You know, the grasshoppers and whatever other insects were around would of course try to avoid the fire and the smoke. And so they would take to the air. The white-tailed hawk or the fire hawk would follow behind and just pick off these insects and gorge. And so the locals started to call them firehawks. I thought that was a pretty neat deal. This is a spotted owl, and I go back to Frank Fabro, the young man that I met. He wants to be an ornithologist. He's a student at, well, he's graduated now, but he was a student at UC Davis, and he had just done his summer work working for a timber company spotting spotted owl nests, and so that they could be marked off, I think, in a quarter-mile square, so the timber company didn't cut too close to the nest. And that was his job, was to find those. And he had said, hey, if you have trouble getting on a spotted, give me a call. I'll help you get on one. So I was going out to California. I gave him a ring. We scheduled to meet somewhere. He was kind enough to drive about 3 hours and meet me at 5 in the morning. And we parked the cars, got out, started hiking. We went about a mile. And he said, you know, I think if we turn in here, we'll be able to find a spotted owl nest. So he turned around and handed me a machete. The forest was so thick, we had to actually fight our way through it with the machete. We went maybe a quarter mile into the forest, came into an opening that was probably 40 feet square. And right in the middle of it was this beautiful spotted owl. And this spotted owl could not have cared less, just like the ferruginous in King Ranch, could not have cared less that we were there. I think maybe Frank has a real comfort on these birds, but we sat down on a log, once again, ate breakfast, and watched this bird for close to an hour. It stared at us like it looks like it's doing right now in this picture. It did come down off the branch once because a mouse made the mistake of going by, and it dropped down and got it, went back up, and we watched it eat it, and that was it. And when we left and stood up and made noise and went back through the forest, this bird never moved again. It just followed us with its eyes and seemed very comfortable that we were there. That was a gift. That was a magical moment. And you know, everybody's got their favorite birds. For some people, it's their next bird or the last bird, or hummingbirds or warblers, or in my case, raptors. But one of the reasons that I love raptors so much is because you do get these moments where you can sit and watch the birds, you know, for a long time. Whereas with hummingbirds and songbirds and whatnot, it's not exactly the same thing. I'm not saying it's better or worse, but in trying to identify why raptors are so much my favorite, I realized that was it. The opportunity to sit in the middle of a forest in California, National Forest in California, and watch a spotted owl live its life for an hour is just something that was amazing to me. And so that's why I enjoy it so much. The swallow-tailed kite, this is the first one that I write about in the book. And the reason for that is that my son and I were out. We live on a lake. We were out on a pontoon boat, just having a cigar. The engine was off. We were just floating around the middle of the lake, middle of the week, middle of the day. And 2 swallowtail kites flew overhead. This is one of them. And they were the first ones that have been seen in the county and the first ones that have been seen on the lake. And it was kind of exciting. I was able to get the picture. My son and I kept talking. And that's where the idea gelled on the Raptor Big Year. And by the time we got back to the dock, we had come up with the name for the book, Raptor Quest. And so it was a pretty good afternoon out on the boat. And I was able to get a friend of mine who has the most birds in our county. And just that's what he does. He doesn't like to travel. He doesn't really like to leave the house, but he loves to find birds in the county. Yeah, I called him and he was able to come on out here and get on the bird. and add it to his life list. So he was very excited. So that was kind of a cool thing. I had mentioned that I had seen 4 small owls in Colorado. This was due primarily, actually 100%, to a gentleman named Scott Rashid. If you don't know Scott, he is a small owl enthusiast. He has spent the last 25 years studying northern pygmy owls, flammulated owls, boreal owls, and northern saw-whet owls in Rocky Mountain National Park. That is what he has done. He knows more about these birds and more about Rocky Mountain National Park than just about anybody. I was put in touch with him. I cannot remember by who, but we got together, we hit it off, and he generously went out with me for days while we looked for these various birds. And then he called me back out in the fall. He does a banding project every year in conjunction with the national park. And I got to work on that with him for 4 or 5 nights. This is a boreal owl. We were very lucky. The year that I was there, the year that we did this, was his 24th consecutive year of doing the banding. In the 23 previous years, they had netted 19 boreal owls, all of whom were tagged and released healthy, no problems with any of them, but just less than 1 a year. In the 4 or 5 nights that I was working with him, we actually were able to catch 2. This was the second one, and he let me release the bird. So that was pretty cool. The flammulated owl, just in the area of Candor, is the only one of the 53 that I never saw. I heard it on multiple nights, multiple times, but it is an elusive little sucker, and we were never able to get on it. Scott said it's the most difficult one of all of them for him to find out there. I was not able to. We heard it a number of times, but never did get to see it, and still haven't. I was just out with Scott visiting May or June. We went looking again, didn't find it, but I'm going to keep looking until I do. So that is the one of the 53 that escaped my eyes. Commissary Ridge, which is in Wyoming, has both a banding station and a hawk watch, and you can get the GPS coordinates to go there, which I had planned on doing, in part because a young woman who worked at a Raptor center that I was on the board of directors for had left the center and gone to work at the hawk watch for the summer that I was traveling out there. And these hawk watches, as it turns out, I'm not a huge fan of hawk watches. It's just not my thing to sit there and watch these birds fly overhead all day long. But for the people who are, it's amazing. This young woman, along with 2 young men, spent 8 weeks working on the top of this windswept hill with just rocks and lots of wind and desolate. And they worked 6.5 days a week from sunrise to sunset. The only day they don't is a half day on Wednesday. They shut down early, go into town, buy groceries, and take showers and stuff because there is nothing up here at the top of this ridge. And they work this all day long, and it's amazing. They also have a banding station that works in conjunction, and they had caught this sharp-shinned hawk, which they were kind enough to let me release. So that was pretty cool to get to hold a Sharpie and let that go. So that was an awful lot of fun. Red-tailed hawks, very common everywhere, certainly in Georgia and around the country. A couple of things I think are interesting about red-tailed hawks, and they're one of my 2 or 3 favorite of all of them, even though they're common. I think they're stunning. I think they're beautiful birds, and I just absolutely adore them. But most of you probably know that when you see a bald eagle in a movie or a commercial or in a TV show, and you hear that powerful screech or scream that goes out, it is not the bald eagle. It is a red-tailed hawk, and that is because a red-tailed hawk has a magnificent, awe-inspiring, almost frightening call, whereas the bald eagle has a high-pitched young girl squeal thing to it. It is not at all what you would think is consistent with the look of the bird. What's interesting about that is the scream that you hear from the red-tailed hawk is almost always the same one. It just gets passed around from sound engineer to sound engineer, and it has for years. And so they just all use the same one. So every time you see a bald eagle and it lets out that powerful call, you're actually listening to this beautiful red-tailed hawk. The other fascinating thing, or one of the other fascinating things about the red-tailed hawk, has to do with President Dwight D. Eisenhower. When Dwight became president, he wanted to set up an interstate highway program, and he did. It started in the mid-1950s, and it wasn't completed until 1994, long after he died, but he was the impetus for it. One of the unintended consequences, as almost every major project in any walk of life has, was the fact that what you created when you were building highways was perfect red-tailed hawk habitat. You cleared out the road, and in general, you cleared out space on either side of the road, which was perfect then for squirrels and moles and voles. And you put up telephone poles, which are perfect perches for red-tailed hawks to hunt from. So we get them in all 48 states. They are common. It's hard to drive on a highway or a freeway around this country and not see a ton of red-tailed hawks. And I think that's kind of cool. And every time I do, I thank President Eisenhower for making that happen. Peregrine falcon. This is the only picture in the book that was not taken in nature. This was a captive peregrine falcon from the organization I was on the board of, but I just thought it was such a great picture of the falcon that I went ahead and used it. And they are having a wild life. You know, we almost lost them to DDT in the 70s, and they've been coming back stronger and powerful. They are in every major city in the lower 48 states, and there are two reasons for that. One is they are cliff nesters, and major cities have skyscrapers, and to a peregrine falcon, that just looks like a cliff. So they naturally will nest on a skyscraper, and they have almost unlimited food in the form of pigeons, which they love. And major cities are obviously filled with pigeons. And so they are I was just in New York a couple months ago, and there is a peregrine falcon, at least one peregrine falcon nest under every single bridge coming and going from Manhattan. In Atlanta, which is the closest major city to me, about 3 hours away, the Four Seasons Hotel built a peregrine nesting box on the 50th floor. So when nesting season hits around March of 25, they're hoping to get a pair of peregrines to nest. They have had peregrines show up and sit on top of the box and eat the pigeons they've caught, but they're really hoping to get a nesting pair come March. So keeping our fingers crossed, and I'll keep in touch with them and hopefully go out and see them. Conowinga Dam in Maryland, about 45 miles northeast of Baltimore. It's on the Susquehanna River. If you're not familiar with it, there are a couple of times a year where you can go and literally see hundreds of bald eagles. The shad run up the river, and as they go through the dam, many of them get killed or knocked unconscious. And there are 200 to 300 bald eagles that are there and come and swoop and take these things off the top of the water. Double-crested cormorants are everywhere, and they're trying to get them too. So you can see the eagles stealing from the cormorants. You can see the adults stealing from the juveniles. You can get as many, if you're into photography, you can get as many photographs as you want of them soaring, fighting, eating, hunting, whatever it is that you want. And if you just love to sit and watch beautiful birds, you can sit all day long. There's a neat little walkway that's right below the dam. That's where everybody gathers. And I've sat there sometimes for 8 or 10 hours in a day, talked to other birders and photographers, and just watch the animals. It is a spectacular thing to do if you ever get a chance. Again, it's the Conowinga Dam, Susquehanna River in Maryland. I mentioned how much I love red tails. I'm also a giant fan of osprey. And we have about 6 nesting pair every year, real close to the house. We get to watch them. And they use the trees in our backyard along the water to eat. And so I'm able to see ospreys from basically March to September. There are a number of things that I think are very cool and unique to ospreys. Number one is they're purely sushi eaters. I know that 1/10 of 1% of the time they'll scrounge something, but in general, they uniquely eat fresh fish. They are the only migratory bird that carries a lunch with it. All migratory birds fatten up, and they'll double their weight and prepare for their long flight. The osprey does that as well, but in addition, the last thing it does before it takes off, say flying from across the Gulf of Mexico with a 600-mile flight, is they'll grab one last fish, turn it head forward. They always turn their fish head forward, and they'll eat that fish along the way. They're the only ones that do that. There's something else that they do that is unique to them. There's no explanation yet, or no agreed upon explanation. But when fledgling osprey leave, which is generally in September, although that's changing, of course, with climate change. But when they leave and fly south for the winter, they usually leave around sometime after Labor Day. They do not come back in 6 months that first time. They stay for 18 months. They stay through a whole cycle. Ornithologists can't figure out exactly why they're doing that, but they do. And then 18 months later, they get right into the cycle. They come back to where they were born. They leave every 6 months, come back 6 months later. It's an interesting thing. And one of the things that's cool about osprey is they are diving hunters, whereas a bald eagle, say, is a surface hunter. It doesn't catch fish below the surface. An osprey can catch fish up to 2.5 feet underwater, and their eyes are unique among raptors in that they adjust for refraction. So when they see, if any of you have ever, when you were a kid or whatever, tried to spear fish, you would keep missing because the refraction causes you to think the fish is somewhere it's not. Ospreys adjust for that, and they adjust for that at 70 or 80 miles an hour in a dive from 150 feet up, and they hit the fish. It's truly amazing. This is a great gray owl, which I was able to find at Yellowstone. This was a beautiful January day, snowy, minus 25 degrees. And I was able to get on this great gray and spend some time watching. I was by myself, maybe because it was minus 25 degrees. And for those of you that are photographers, you probably know this. When you get temperatures like that, as I did that day, you can't roll your windows up or have the heater on, because if you do, then when you open the door to take your shots, your camera fogs up. And by the time it defogs, you probably missed the great gray or the moose or the wolf or whatever it was you were trying to shoot. So I'm driving around Yellowstone National Park, minus 25 degree temperature in a huge snowstorm. I've got about 1.5 inches or 2 inches of snow on the floor mats in the car. But when I found the bird, I was able to get on it and get the shots. And I'm going back this January with a buddy of mine. We're going to go back for a week and hopefully get to shoot some animals like this. So very excited about that. On the trip, I chased rarities. Some people do, some people don't. I enjoy it. Bat falcon was one of them. This one was down in Texas, for those of you that didn't know. And I was able to get on that, which didn't take much skill. It came to the same sawed-off telephone pole every night at about 5:30 for 3 weeks before it disappeared. No one's sure where it went, but disappear it did. And I also found a stellar sea eagle in Maine. If you haven't done that one, it's heading on its way back down. This will be the third winter in a row that the patterns at least started off the same. The last 2 winters, it wound up in Maine in February on the Arrowsick Bridge. The first year I missed it. I looked around for 3 or 4 days, didn't get it. Second year, I got it right away when I was there. So did everybody else on the bridge. But if you haven't seen a stellar sea eagle, they're absolutely awe-inspiring. They're about 50% bigger than bald eagles. And bald eagles are all over on the Arrowsick River. So you get to see the comparison constantly. But when you see a stellar sea eagle take out a Canada goose, you've seen something you're not going to forget for a long time. Northern hawk owl, which is on the cover of my book. This was the 53rd bird. It's just started to become important to me. I couldn't find it. And I was really focused on it. My OCD kicked in. One of the challenges is that Cornell and eBird protect the northern hawk owl like they protect gyrfalcons and goshawks and stuff, in that they don't give exact locations when people do spot them and report them. So you'll get a huge area like a county that eBird will show you, but it won't give you the exact location. In this case, I got a call from a buddy in Montana. He said, there are some people in Wise River, Montana that are on a northern hawk owl. You got to get up there. That was a Friday night. My wife had me on a Saturday morning plane. It flew in close, drove 3 hours. I'd allotted 4 days to find it. And as I was driving into town, there was a dirt road that looked promising. I was just going to poke around until dark and then spend the daylight hours for the next 3 or 4 days. But I drove down this road about a mile, saw 2 cars on the side of the road. And as all birders know, that either means somebody broke down and somebody's helping them, or they're on a bird. And sure enough, they were on this northern hawk owl. And it was sitting on a telephone pole on the other side of this 1-lane dirt road. I pulled up and watched it, got some pictures, went back the next morning, There was nobody there except the bird. It was back on the same telephone pole, and I probably got to spend about 2 hours with it. And then toward the end, the bird dropped down from the telephone pole, shot across the road, and came right at me, and its wing brushed my blue jeans. For me, that was a spiritual, magical moment. I'm not sure why it meant so much to me, but it did. And this was the actual bird. This was the shot. This is right after it brushed against me as it was flying low to the other side. I went about 30 feet into a field and just perched in a bush and hung out there for a while. This was one of the shots I got of that bird, so I put it on the cover of the book. And every time I see it, I'm just reminded of one of the absolute highlights of the entire adventure. If you were intrigued by the story or you like the photographs, you can go to my website, naturallyscott.com. You can buy the book there if you want, or just go to Amazon. As far as pictures go, I've got about 400 or 500 of my favorites. You can buy them, but you don't have to. They're right there on the website. You're welcome to look at them. I started to add some other animals. I just got back from Africa a couple of weeks ago, so I've got some really cool mammal shots there of lions and hyenas and giraffes and rhinos and elephants. So that was, and on that trip, I was able to pick up about 220 lifers, which was pretty cool. Most exciting, 15 of them were raptors, and 3 of those were 3 different kinds of goshawks. So that was really cool. I want to say thank you to Mary Lou and all of you for listening. I think, yeah, we're right at the point where I'm supposed to stop. This is the only picture that you'll see that is doctored. This yellow sign on the bottom that says thank you actually says high voltage. This is a shot from Pinnacles National Park in California. I love this shot of this high-powered, amazing predator sitting on this pole with a sign that said high voltage. But I switched it to thank you just for this show. I want to thank my wife, as I always do, because none of the things that I've been able to do would I've been able to do without her. And now comes my favorite part of the whole thing, which is questions. If anybody has them, I would love to answer them.
It's going to work. Can you hear me okay, Scott?
I can.
Okay. So I think if you really want to ask a question, either I'm going to have the relay or you can walk up here and ask your story.
There's some in the chat maybe too.
I looked at them. Thank you. Come on, I know somebody's got a question.
Okay. I'll let you can relate.
Okay.
So I know you saw some raptors. That's great. I'm Indian. But did you see any other birds that surprised you along the way?
Did you catch any of that?
You were asking if I saw other birds that surprised me along the way?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'm always looking for raptors. That's my matter of fact. Yesterday, again, it seems to be a theme. My son and I were sitting in the backyard having a cigar and a fire, and a merlin came onto the property. Only the second one, but there were a number of birds that I saw. Fortunately for me, because I've just started birding, almost all of the birds were new and exciting. As a matter of fact, when I was in Africa, I was able to get my 1,000th eBird bird on my life list. And secretary bird in Africa was stunning. And there are a number, puffins. My wife is not a birder. The idea of, being in minus 25-degree weather looking for stuff, but I did get her to go on a puffin trip with me in May. So we went up to Maine and Canada and saw puffins. And so that was spectacular. The ones behind me on the picture here, these are from Africa. These are little bee eaters, amazingly colorful birds. And I don't know if it shows up well here, but these little bee eaters both have a bee in their mouth, which I just thought was a really lucky photograph to get. So yeah, there were, warblers and songbirds and all kinds of stuff around the country and around the world that have just been amazing to find. And it's one of the things that I just love. It's so exciting. I mean, some of the birds, I can sit in my front yard and watch the same birds over and over and over. And I do that many days. I'll sit there with my camera. We've built a bird sanctuary, and I'll just sit and watch those birds, and I love that. But I'm also equally, maybe even more excited about new birds. When I'm traveling somewhere, I do chase birds. I like to see birds I've never seen before. And so, like, I'm going out to California next month, in part to shoot mammals. I'm going to go on whale watch and an elephant seal and some different things. But there's a pelagic trip in there going out of Monterey. And I'm so excited about seeing some of these birds, or hopefully seeing some of them that I've never seen before, and maybe getting some good shots. So that's the great thing about it, is you get to see all these different things while you're out there. Sorry about the long answer to a short question.
We've had a couple of Zoom chat questions. One of them was, how did you find the raptors? Did you use any kind of guides? It sounded like you have friends everywhere, but did you use any kind of printed guides?
Yes, and I have friends now. When I started, I didn't know people in the birding world. So in part, I used eBird. You know, if you haven't used the Explore function on eBird, either the online one or the mobile app, it's amazing for finding birds and tracking them down. So I use that quite a bit. But when I would go to areas like Montana or Arizona or Texas or Florida or California, the first time I would go to an area where I thought it was a great birding area, I would hire a guide for the day, because the guide helps you find these spots. For me, they help you find these spots and help you get on birds and show you locations. So I had mentioned that trip into Montana where I'd driven out and saw the 119 raptors. Well, that was a spot that the guide there had shown me. And I've become friends with many of these guides. We keep in touch and we talk. I'm going to Yellowstone in January. I'm getting together with two guys that have helped me with guiding, but we're just getting together to hang out and look for wolves and have dinner. So, and as you get to meet people and you share your story and what you're doing, again, because the birding community is so fantastic, people are willing to help. I would get phone calls saying, there's a gyrfalcon up here. There's an XYZ over here. You got to get down. The hook-billed kite is here. Recently, there was a roadside hawk in Texas, which is not a U.S. bird. And I'd seen it on trips to Central America, but I'd never seen it in the States. I got calls saying, hey, there's a roadside hawk that just crossed over into the U.S. in Texas. So you go down and you find that bird. So as you meet people and talk to them, and now doing these presentations, because I'm doing them all over the country, I'm doing 3 this week, Georgia, obviously, and then Michigan, and I think Indiana. You meet people online. I'll get texts or emails from people after the presentations. And so then when I go into those areas, I'll call them and we'll go out and bird together and hang out. So you just build this network. So between eBird and networking and guides, you can pretty much find what you want to find or need to find, if you're willing to invest the time. If you have the luxury of doing a little travel and you're willing to invest the time. Did that answer the question, I hope? All right, we'll go with yes.
Questions. I'm going to skip to this one because I know I've got at least one photographer in the room. The question was, your photographs are strikingly beautiful. What camera settings do you use? What setup do you use?
Okay, first of all, I'm glad that question was asked, because then I continue to make this statement, which is I've never done one of these presentations without being asked about the equipment. It's a pretty common question. And so my equipment, I use 2 cameras. They're both Sony's A1. One of them has a 200 to 600 lens, and one of them has a 70 to 200 lens. So my range is 70 to 600. I carry them on the side. I've got straps and carry them. And my wife laughs. I've got a pistol on one side and a rifle on the other, because it allows me to shoot things that are close up and far away. I love the Sony. I love the A1. I love the mirrorless. I love that it shoots 30 frames a second. The tracking is amazing on it. It's got 50 megapixels. I think it's a magical camera. I bought it because I think it's the best one out there, but there are Nikons and Canons and different cameras that are probably just as good, maybe better. I think a lot of that is Ford and Chevy or Coke and Pepsi. It's just personal preference. And but those are the cameras I use to get the bird and flight shots, which are probably the toughest of the wildlife shots to get. You've really got to have a great tracking system, and the one on the Sonys are amazing. And I find them to be extremely helpful in getting those bird and flight shots. That 600 zoom with the 50 megapixel I can shoot birds that are pretty far away when I crop them in, still get some decent looking shots. And so I don't say this because I'm bragging. I think a lot of the shots I've taken are beautiful, but I think that a little bit of it is me, but a lot of it is just being in the right place and having good equipment. That doesn't mean you can't take great shots with an iPhone, because you can. But having a great camera is really helpful. And being in the right place, it's like that old line, 90% of life is showing up. And that's kind of the case with the birding shots. But there's no doubt that I benefit greatly by being fortunate enough to own those cameras. They have been a gift to me when I'm out shooting. Whether I'm shooting birds or shooting mammals, they are invaluable.
Well, let me just read it. Have you found bald eagles to be not as honorable as we'd like to think, and actually be thieves, as many have said they truly are?
Well, they are, and we do tend to do that. We put our little human foibles onto the animals that we see. And there's no doubt bald eagles are probably the most opportunistic of the raptors, at least the ones here that I've had a chance to study a little bit. They will, they'll scavenge, they'll hunt, they'll steal. They'll steal from their own kind. And it is fascinating to watch. Whereas some of the other birds don't do that. Although they will kill each other. A great horned owl, for example, will hunt just about any bird, including osprey and other owls and whatnot. So they're opportunistic as well, but at a different level. But I understand people describing bald eagles like that. It's one of the reasons there's a battle to, although technically it's not the national bird of the United States. Most of us think of it that way, but it's not officially that. And there is a battle maybe to pick a different bird other than the bald eagle, just for those reasons. Its tendency to steal from others and scavenge somehow seems less honorable. To me, their job is to survive. I mean, that is, again, we were in Africa for a couple of weeks, and lions, which are, as it turns out, the most beautiful animal I've ever seen is a male lion. As cliche as that is, there's a reason it's cliche, but they are really the bald eagles of the large mammals. They steal from others. They steal from other lions. They scavenge. They hunt. They're bald eagles without wings. And, maybe that's why they are the apex predators, because they're willing to do whatever it takes to stay alive. If I understood the question correctly, hopefully that was the answer.
Well, we thank you for your presentation and all the beautiful pictures. Yeah.
Well, you're welcome.
And Kathy, are we done? Thank you so much. And
Have a great night, and thanks to all of you.
thanks, Josh.
Bye, everybody.